The fluorescent lights of LaGuardia Airport buzzed overhead as I stood there, clutching a handmade sign with my daughter's name written in careful block letters. Sarah Martinez. I had practiced writing it neatly the night before, wanting everything to be perfect for our reunion. Around me, passengers streamed through the arrivals gate, families embracing, lovers kissing, children running into grandparents' arms, but I stood alone, scanning every face, my heart hammering with an excitement I hadn't felt in 3 years. Then I saw her. Sarah, my baby girl, now 32, walking through the gate with the confidence of someone who owned the world. Her hair was perfectly styled, her clothes screamed expensive, and she carried herself like the successful Wall Street executive she'd become. I raised my sign higher, a smile splitting my face so wide it hurt, but she walked right past me. Not just past me, through me, as if I were invisible. She was talking on her phone, her voice carrying that crisp, professional tone I'd heard in our rare conversations. Yes, I need the penthouse suite at the Ritz-Carlton in Monaco, she was saying. First-class tickets on the earliest flight tomorrow. Money is no object. Her laugh was musical, confident, completely foreign to my ears. This wasn't the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. This wasn't the teenager who cried in my arms when boys broke her heart. This was a stranger wearing my daughter's face. I followed her with my eyes, still holding that pathetic sign, as she disappeared into the crowd of first-class passengers heading toward the luxury car service area. It took me 20 minutes of standing there like a fool before I realized the truth. She hadn't forgotten to look for me. She had chosen not to see me. The weight of that realization hit me like a physical blow. I sank into one of those uncomfortable airport chairs, the sign crumpling in my trembling hands, and for the first time in decades, I let myself remember how we got here, how the little girl I'd sacrificed everything for had grown into a woman who was ashamed of where she came from. Life has a cruel way of showing you that sometimes the people you love most are the ones who hurt you deepest, and sometimes the biggest betrayals come wrapped in designer clothes and delivered with a smile. My story begins 28 years ago in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Queens, where the radiator clanged all night and the walls were so thin you could hear the neighbors' conversations word for word. I was 24, recently divorced, and completely alone with a 4-year-old daughter who looked at me like I hung the moon. Robert, my ex-husband, had left us for his secretary, taking nothing but his clothes and leaving behind a mountain of debt that felt impossible to climb. Those early years were a masterclass in survival. I worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and stocking shelves at a grocery store during the day. Sarah would spend her evenings at Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment next door, doing her homework at a kitchen table covered in plastic flowers while I scrubbed corporate bathrooms and emptied trash cans, until my back screamed in protest. Every morning, I'd wake up at 5, make Sarah's breakfast with whatever we had in the cupboard, and walk her to school holding her tiny hand in mine. She never complained about wearing hand-me-down clothes or carrying her lunch in a brown paper bag, while other kids had fancy lunchboxes. She never asked why we couldn't afford the field trips or the school pictures. She just smiled that smile and told me I was the best mommy in the world, but I could see it in her eyes even then, the hunger for something more. The way she'd stare at the other mothers in their nice cars, wearing clothes that didn't come from thrift stores. The way she'd press her face against store windows, looking at toys we couldn't afford. I promised myself that someday, I'd give her everything she wanted. Someday, she'd have the life I never could. I started taking night classes at the community college, studying by candlelight when the electricity got cut off, reading textbooks I'd bought used and highlighted with borrowed pens. My goal was simple: get a better job, make more money, give Sarah opportunities. The exhaustion was bone deep. There were nights I'd fall asleep at the kitchen table, my face pressed against accounting textbooks, only to wake up to Sarah covering me with her little blanket. When Sarah was 8, I finally landed a job as a bookkeeper at a small law firm. It wasn't much, but it was steady, and for the first time in years, we had health insurance. I remembered the day I told her. She hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. "Does this mean we can get pizza?" she asked. Such a small thing, but to us, pizza delivery was luxury. That's when I started dreaming bigger for her. Sarah was brilliant, not just smart, but genuinely gifted. Her teachers constantly told me she had potential, that with the right opportunities, she could go anywhere, do anything. I began researching colleges, scholarships, programs for gifted children. Harvard became my obsession. If I could just get her to Harvard, I told myself, she'd never have to struggle the way I did. The sacrifices started small. I gave up coffee, then cable TV, then anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. I took on freelance bookkeeping jobs on weekends, working 18-hour days while Sarah played quietly in the corner of whatever office would let me bring her. I sold my grandmother's wedding ring, my father's watch, anything of value I could find. The money went into a college fund that grew painfully slowly, dollar by dollar, sacrifice by sacrifice. Let me know if you connected with this story so far by leaving sacrifice in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories that touch the soul. By the time Sarah reached high school, she had transformed into someone I barely recognized. The sweet, grateful little girl had been replaced by a teenager who seemed perpetually embarrassed by our circumstances. She'd ducked down in the car when I picked her up from school, mortified by our 15-year-old Honda with the dented bumper and the passenger door that only opened from the inside. Her friends all came from money, real money. They lived in houses with multiple bathrooms and 3-car garages. They went on spring break vacations to places I'd only seen in magazines. Their mothers wore designer clothes and got their nails done weekly. I worked extra hours to buy Sarah the right backpack, the right shoes, anything to help her fit in. But I could see the shame in her eyes when she looked at me. The worst part was watching her develop what I can only call selective hearing when it came to our family history. When friends asked about her father, she'd say he died in an accident, rather than admit he'd abandoned us. When they asked about our small apartment, she'd claim we were temporarily downsizing while our house was being renovated. The lies came so easily to her, each one another tiny betrayal of the life we'd built together. But I told myself it was normal. Teenagers are embarrassed by their parents. That's just how it works. Besides, Sarah's grades were perfect, her SAT scores were off the charts, and Harvard had begun sending recruitment letters. All my sacrifices were paying off. She was going to have the life I'd dreamed of for her. Senior year brought the college application process, and with it, a whole new level of financial stress. Application fees, SAT prep courses, visits to campuses, everything cost money we didn't have. I picked up a third job, working as a weekend catering server at fancy events, where I'd watch wealthy families celebrate milestone moments I'd never be able to afford for my own daughter. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd serve champagne to mothers who casually spent more on a single dress than I made in a month, while saving every penny to give my daughter a chance at their world. Sometimes, during those long nights carrying trays of caviar and imported cheese, I'd imagine Sarah at one of these parties someday, not as the help, but as the guest of honor. When the Harvard acceptance letter arrived, we both cried, Sarah from joy, me from relief and terror. Relief that all those years of sacrifice had paid off. Terror because I had no idea how I was going to pay for it. Even with financial aid, the costs were staggering. But I'd come this far. I wasn't going to let money stop us now. I took out every loan I could qualify for, including a second mortgage on our little apartment that I'd finally managed to buy after years of saving. I sold everything of value we owned, including my mother's antique sewing machine that had been in our family for generations. I even took a loan against my meager 401k, knowing it would devastate my retirement prospects. The day I drove Sarah to Harvard, she barely spoke to me. I had planned it as a celebration, maybe lunch at a nice restaurant, some mother-daughter bonding time before she started this new chapter. Instead, she spent the entire 4-hour drive texting with her new roommate and researching the best restaurants near campus, places that charged more for a single meal than I spent on groceries in a week. When we arrived at her dorm, I was struck by the casual wealth of her classmates and their families. Mercedes and BMWs, UVs, unloaded steamer trunks, and designer bedding. Mothers in Chanel suits directed professional movers, while fathers in polo shirts discussed their summer homes in the Hamptons. I felt like an alien in my discount store dress and borrowed car. Sarah seemed to sense my discomfort, and rather than stand by me, she distanced herself. When I tried to help her unpack, she waved me away. When I suggested we grab dinner together, she claimed she had orientation activities. When I finally left, she hugged me briefly and whispered, "Thanks for everything, Mom. I'll call you soon." That was the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it yet. The calls did come, but they were brief and focused on practical matters. Money for books, money for lab fees, money for study abroad programs. Our conversations grew shorter and more impersonal with each passing month. When I'd ask about her classes, her friends, her life, she'd give vague, non-committal answers before finding an excuse to hang up. The truth is, I could feel her slipping away, but I convinced myself it was temporary. College was demanding, social pressures were intense, and she was just busy building her future, our future, because in my mind, her success was our success. Her escape from poverty was our escape. I was living vicariously through every opportunity. I was providing her, and I was proud of that sacrifice. I hope you're still with me, because the story takes quite a turn from here. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The changes in Sarah became impossible to ignore during her sophomore year. Her voice on the phone developed an accent I couldn't place, something vaguely European or perhaps just generically upper. She'd casually mention spring break trips to Cabo, designer clothes she'd borrowed from friends, and internships at prestigious firms that somehow came with networking events at country clubs. When I'd ask how she was affording these experiences on her work-study budget, she'd get defensive and claim everything was covered by scholarships or that her friends were really generous. The explanations never quite added up, but I was too exhausted from working 3 jobs to dig deeper. I trusted her, I believed in her, and perhaps most importantly, I needed to believe that all my sacrifices were creating the life she deserved. Junior year brought the first major red flag. Sarah called me crying actual tears, which was rare by then, claiming she needed emergency money for a medical procedure. $5,000, she said, for a surgery that wasn't covered by the student health plan. I didn't hesitate. I liquidated what was left of my savings and wired her the money that same day. 2 weeks later, I saw photos on social media of Sarah on a ski trip to Aspen. She was laughing, wearing expensive ski gear, surrounded by friends whose relaxed smiles spoke of lives unburdened by financial worry. When I called to ask about her surgery, she claimed the trip was therapeutic and that her doctor had recommended stress relief activities. The explanation felt hollow, but I wanted to believe her. That summer, Sarah announced she wouldn't be coming home. She'd landed an internship at a Wall Street investment firm, she said, and would be staying in Manhattan. It was a prestigious opportunity, the kind that could launch her career. I was proud, even as my heart broke a little. 3 months without seeing my daughter, 3 months of our small apartment feeling emptier than ever. When she did finally visit that Christmas, she seemed like a completely different person. Everything about our humble home appeared to physically pain her. She complained about the noise from the street, the outdated furniture, the lack of central air conditioning. She spent most of the visit on her laptop or phone, taking calls about investment opportunities and networking events. The worst moment came on Christmas morning. I'd saved 4 months to buy her a beautiful cashmere scarf from Macy's, the nicest thing I'd ever been able to afford for her. When she unwrapped it, her smile was polite but distant. "Oh Mom," she said, "this is ... sweet. I just don't really wear this style anymore." Later, I found it still in its box, hidden at the bottom of her suitcase. Senior year brought the final transformation. Sarah's calls became even more infrequent, usually only when she needed something. Money for graduate school applications, money for interview clothes, money for networking dinners. Each request came with elaborate explanations about why these investments in her future were necessary, and each time, I found a way to give her what she needed. When graduation approached, I assumed we'd celebrate together. I'd been planning the trip for months, saving every penny for a hotel room in Boston and a nice dinner somewhere special. But when I called to coordinate our plans, Sarah's voice was strange, distant. "Actually, Mom," she said, "I think it might be better if you don't come. Graduation is really chaotic, and I'll be so busy with job interviews and networking events. Plus, parking is impossible, and hotels are expensive. Maybe we can celebrate when I'm more settled." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not come to my daughter's graduation, missed the moment that represented the culmination of 20 years of sacrifice. I tried to argue, to explain how much it meant to me, but she was firm. It would be easier if I stayed home. I spent that graduation weekend alone in our apartment, watching other families' celebration photos, scroll past on social media, pictures of proud parents hugging their children in caps and gowns, multi-generational family gatherings, graduation dinners at fancy restaurants. I wasn't in any of them, but I told myself that Sarah's success was celebration enough. The job offer from Goldman Sachs came with fanfare. Sarah called to tell me the news, her voice bright with excitement for the first time in months. The salary was more than I made in 3 years combined. The apartment was in a doorman building on the Upper East Side. The signing bonus was enough to pay off her student loans immediately. "I did it, Mom," she said, and for a moment, she sounded like my little girl again. All those years of hard work paid off. I'm finally going to have the life I deserve, the life she deserved. The phrase stuck with me long after we hung up. What about the life I deserved? What about recognition for the woman who'd made it all possible? But I pushed those thoughts away. Her success was my success. Her happiness was my reward. That's what I told myself, anyway. The first year after graduation, our contact dwindled to holiday calls and birthday texts. Sarah was incredibly busy learning her new job, constantly traveling for client meetings, building her network with colleagues and clients. The explanations always sounded reasonable, but the distance felt deliberate. When I'd call her office, assistants would take messages that often went unreturned. When I'd try her cell phone, calls would go straight to voicemail. The few times we did speak, she seemed distracted, always rushing to get to another meeting or dinner, or event that was more important than talking to her mother. 2 years passed. 2 years of minimal contact, of feeling like a stranger in my own daughter's life. I'd see glimpses of her new world through social media, photos from charity galas, weekend trips to the Hamptons, dinners at restaurants where the cheapest entree cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She looked happy, successful, sophisticated. She looked like she belonged in that world, but she never looked like she missed me. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in March, and I was sitting in my apartment, eating a dinner of soup and crackers while watching the evening news. My phone rang, and Sarah's name appeared on the screen. My heart leaped. It had been 3 months since we'd last spoken. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice strangely formal. "I hope you're well. I have something to ask you, and I hope you'll say yes." She wanted me to visit her in New York, just for a few days, she said. She had some things to take care of, business travel, she explained vaguely, and she needed someone trustworthy to watch her apartment. "It would be like a vacation for me," she said. "I could see the city, enjoy her fancy buildings, amenities, order room service." My heart soared. After 3 years of feeling forgotten, my daughter wanted me in her life again. She needed me. Maybe this was the beginning of repairing our relationship, of bridging the distance that had grown between us. "Of course," I said, probably too quickly. "I'd love to come see you." "Great," she replied, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "I'll email you the flight details. Oh, and Mom, maybe don't mention to anyone that you're visiting. I'm dealing with some sensitive business matters, and I need to keep my personal life private right now." The request struck me as odd, but I agreed. I would have agreed to anything to see my daughter again, to be part of her world, even briefly. I spent the next week planning the trip with an excitement I hadn't felt in years. I bought a new dress, nothing expensive, but something that wouldn't embarrass her. I researched restaurants we might visit together, museums we could explore. I pictured us walking through Central Park, maybe having coffee at one of those sidewalk cafes I'd seen in movies. I imagined her showing me her office, introducing me to her colleagues, letting me see the life she'd built with the foundation I'd provided. For the first time in years, I felt truly hopeful about our relationship. I had no idea that I was walking into the most painful experience of my life, that the daughter I'd sacrificed everything for was about to teach me exactly how little I meant to her, and that the trip I thought would bring us closer together would instead show me just how far she'd drifted from the person I'd raised her to be. The plane ticket she sent was coach, naturally, sandwiched between a crying baby and a man who spent the entire flight coughing without covering his mouth. But I didn't care. I was going to see Sarah. After 3 years of phone calls and text messages, I was going to hug my daughter again. As we descended into LaGuardia, I pressed my face to the tiny window and stared out at the sprawling cityscape below. Somewhere down there was my daughter, living the life I'd made possible. The buildings stretched endlessly in every direction, gleaming towers of glass and steel that represented opportunity, success, the American dream realized. My heart swelled with pride, knowing that Sarah was part of this magnificent world. The airport was chaos, thousands of people rushing in every direction, announcements echoing overhead, the constant roar of jets taking off and landing. I made my way to the arrivals area, clutching that handmade sign, checking my appearance in every reflective surface I passed. I wanted to look nice for her, wanted her to be proud to introduce me to her new world. But as the minutes ticked by, and passengers from her flight streamed past without any sign of her, a familiar anxiety began to creep in. This was so typical of our relationship lately. Me, waiting, hoping, while she remained conspicuously absent. I checked my phone constantly, expecting a text with an explanation, an apology, a new plan. That's when I saw her. And that's when my world shattered. She wasn't looking for me. She wasn't scanning the crowd for her mother's face. She was striding through the terminal with the confidence of someone who owned it, talking on her phone about Monaco and first-class tickets and money. Being no object, she was discussing vacation plans that cost more than I made in a year. All while her mother stood 10 feet away holding a pathetic handmade sign. When she finally noticed me, and I use that term loosely, it wasn't with recognition or joy, was with the mild irritation you might feel toward a persistent salesperson. She looked at me like I was a problem to be solved, an inconvenience disrupting her important day. "Excuse me," she said, not even pausing in her phone conversation. "Are you here for airport pickup services? I already have a car waiting." The words hit me like a physical blow. Airport pickup services. She thought I was hired help, her own mother, holding a sign with her name on it, and she assumed I was some kind of employee. I opened my mouth to speak, to identify myself, to bridge the gap between us with words of love and recognition. But before I could make a sound, she had walked away, still talking on her phone about penthouse suites and luxury travel plans. I stood there, watching my daughter disappear into the crowd of first-class passengers, and realized that she hadn't failed to recognize me. She had chosen not to recognize me. The taxi ride to her building was a blur of tears and traffic. I gave the driver the address she'd texted me months ago, an address on the Upper East Side that meant nothing to me then but felt like sacred ground. Now, the place where my daughter had built her new life. The driver, a kind Sikh man with gentle eyes, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "You okay, lady?" he asked as we pulled up to a gleaming high-rise with a uniformed doorman and a marble facade. "You look like you've seen a ghost." In a way, I'd seen the ghost of the daughter I used to know, buried somewhere inside this sophisticated stranger who could afford penthouses in Monaco, but couldn't spare a moment to acknowledge her mother. The doorman greeted me with professional courtesy, checked my name against a list, and handed me a keycard. "Miss Martinez left instructions," he said. "23rd floor, apartment 2314. She said to make yourself comfortable and that she'd be back in a few days." A few days, not a few hours, not tomorrow, a few days. I was beginning to understand that this wasn't a reunion at all. This was a house-sitting arrangement, and I was the unpaid help. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor felt endless. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into a hallway that looked like something from a luxury hotel. Thick carpeting, elegant lighting, the kind of quiet that only comes with serious money. Sarah's apartment door was at the end of the hall, marked with a brass number that caught the light. Using the keycard felt like trespassing, even though I'd been invited. The door opened onto a space that took my breath away, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine, art on the walls that was probably worth more than my annual salary. This was where my daughter lived. This was the life I'd helped build with my sacrifices, but it felt as cold and impersonal as a museum. There were no family photos, no personal mementos, nothing that spoke of the life we'd shared or the love that had motivated every choice I'd made for 28 years. It was beautiful, expensive, and completely devoid of the warmth that makes a place a home. I wandered through the rooms like a tourist, touching surfaces that gleamed with polish, admiring views that cost millions to obtain. The refrigerator was stocked with expensive wine and gourmet food I didn't recognize. The closets were filled with designer clothes that still had tags attached. Everything spoke of wealth, success, achievement. Nothing spoke of love. Nothing spoke of family. Nothing spoke of the woman who had made it all possible. That first night, I lay in the guest bedroom, a space more luxurious than any hotel I'd ever seen, and tried to process what had happened at the airport. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Sarah had been stressed, distracted by work pressures. Maybe she simply hadn't expected me to meet her at the airport and was genuinely confused by the encounter. But deep down, I knew better. The way she'd looked at me, or rather, looked through me, wasn't confusion. It was dismissal. After 3 years of growing distance, she'd reached the point where she could stand 10 feet from her mother and feel nothing but mild annoyance at the interruption to her important phone call. I tried calling her that night, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message explaining who the woman at the airport had been, suggesting we try to coordinate better, expressing how excited I was to see her again. The message was rambling and probably desperate sounding, but I needed her to know that her mother was here, waiting, hoping for some acknowledgement of our relationship. She never called back. The next morning brought a text message that was somehow worse than silence. Hope you're comfortable in the apartment. Help yourself to anything in the fridge. Back from Europe next week. Thanks for house sitting. Thanks for house sitting. Not love you, Mom, or can't wait to catch up, or even sorry I missed you at the airport. Just a polite acknowledgement of services rendered, signed with an initial like I was a business contact rather than the woman who'd given birth to her. That's when the real investigation began. Not intentionally at first. I was just a bored mother, alone in her daughter's apartment, looking for clues about the life she'd built. But what I found in those pristine rooms would change everything I thought I knew about Sarah, and everything I thought I understood about the sacrifices I'd made. The first discovery was in her home office, a sleek space with a desk that probably cost more than my car. Her laptop was password protected, but she'd left several manila folders on the desk, presumably work-related materials she'd forgotten to secure. I told myself I was just tidying up, but really, I was desperate for any insight into who my daughter had become. The first folder contained financial statements that made my head spin. Bank accounts with balances I couldn't even comprehend. Investment portfolios worth more than most people's houses. Credit card statements showing monthly spending that exceeded my annual income. Sarah wasn't just successful. She was wealthy in a way that seemed impossible for someone only 4 years out of college. The second folder contained something more troubling. Correspondence with a private investigator. The letters discussed background verification services and family history modification. I read them 3 times before the meaning sank in. Sarah had hired someone to help her create a new personal history, one that would be more palatable to her new social circle. But it was the third folder that broke my heart completely. It contained drafts of Sarah's biography for various social and professional organizations, and in every single version, I had been erased. According to these carefully crafted stories, Sarah Martinez was an orphan who had overcome tremendous odds through her own determination and the generosity of scholarship programs. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was young, leaving her to be raised by distant relatives who provided basic necessities but no emotional support. In Sarah's official version of her life, I didn't exist. The woman who had worked 3 jobs, sold family heirlooms, and mortgaged her future to pay for Harvard had been replaced by a tragic backstory, designed to evoke sympathy and admiration from wealthy donors and potential mentors. My sacrifices had been rewritten as her resilience. My love had been erased entirely. I sat in that expensive office chair, surrounded by the fruits of my daughter's success, and finally understood the truth. This wasn't about shame or social pressure or the natural evolution of a mother-daughter relationship. This was about deliberate erasure. Sarah hadn't grown distant from me. She had systematically removed me from her life, because my existence didn't fit the narrative she wanted to tell about herself. The penthouse apartment in Monaco, the first-class flights, the casual discussion of unlimited budgets, none of it was about travel or luxury. It was about a woman celebrating her freedom from the humble origins that had once defined her. Every expensive vacation was a victory lap around the life she'd left behind. Every designer purchase was armor against the poverty she'd escaped, and every day that passed without contact was a confirmation that she'd successfully buried the woman who had made it all possible. Spent that night crying in a way I hadn't since she was a child, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from some primal place of loss. But by morning, something had crystallized inside me. I wasn't going to confront her with tears and accusations. I wasn't going to beg for acknowledgement or plead for inclusion in her new life. I was going to wait, and when she finally came home, I was going to give her a chance to explain herself, to justify the choices she'd made, to account for the woman she'd become. Because surely, somewhere inside this sophisticated stranger, some trace of the daughter I'd raised still existed. Surely some part of her remembered the love that had built the foundation for everything she'd achieved. I was about to discover just how wrong I was. The call came on a Thursday morning, 6 days into my stay in Sarah's apartment, I'd settled into a routine of sorts: morning coffee while watching the sunrise over Central Park, afternoons exploring the neighborhood like a tourist in my daughter's world, evenings reading in her library of business books and investment guides. It was a strange, hollow kind of vacation, surrounded by luxury but starved of the only thing I'd really come for: time with my daughter. When her name appeared on my phone screen, my heart jumped the way it always did. Despite everything, the airport incident, the cold text messages, the devastating discoveries in her office, I still held on to hope that we could salvage our relationship. "Mom," she said, her voice crisp and businesslike, "I'm glad I caught you. I'm flying back tonight, and I need to discuss some logistics with you." Logistics. Not "I miss you" or "I'm excited to see you." Logistics. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. "I can't wait to see you. Maybe we can have dinner tomorrow night. I'd love to hear about your trip." There was a pause that lasted just a heartbeat too long. "Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss. My plans have changed somewhat. I'll need you to check out of the apartment tomorrow morning. I'm having some business associates over, and I need the space." The words landed like individual slaps. "Check out business associates. I need the space. I don't understand," I said slowly. "Check out. This is your home, and I'm your mother. Are you saying you don't want me here when you get back?" Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice had that carefully modulated tone she used for difficult professional conversations. "Mom, I think there's been a misunderstanding about this visit. This was always meant to be a temporary arrangement, you watching the apartment while I traveled. It was never intended as a social visit." The floor seemed to shift beneath my feet. "A temporary arrangement, house-sitting, not a reunion between mother and daughter, but a business transaction between strangers." "Sarah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I'm your mother. I came here because you invited me. I hoped we could spend some time together." "I appreciate you helping out," she replied, as if I hadn't spoken. "I'll have my assistant wire some money to your account for your services. Consider it a consulting fee." A consulting fee for her own mother. That's when something inside me snapped. Not into anger. I was too hurt for anger. It snapped into clarity. The kind of brutal honesty that comes when you finally stop making excuses for the people you love. "I found the folders," I said quietly. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. "What folders?" she finally asked, but her voice had changed. The professional mask had slipped slightly. "The biography drafts, the private investigator correspondence, the creative writing exercise where you erase your mother from existence and replace her with a tragic car accident." Now the silence was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. "I see," she said eventually. Her voice was so cold it could have frozen water. "I suppose you went through my private papers while you were house-sitting." "I was looking for my daughter," I replied. "The one I raised, the one I sacrificed everything for, the one who used to call me her best friend. But apparently, she died in a car accident years ago, according to your official biography." "Mom, don't." The word came out sharper than I intended. "Don't call me that. According to your professional materials, your mother is dead. So I must be someone else entirely." I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow, like she was trying to control her temper. When she spoke again, her voice was tight with barely contained fury. "You have no idea what my life is like now. You have no idea what it takes to succeed in this world, what sacrifices I've had to make, what choices I've been forced into. Sometimes the past needs to stay in the past." "The past?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm not the past, Sarah. I'm your mother. I'm the woman who worked 3 jobs to pay for your Harvard education. I'm the woman who sold her grandmother's wedding ring so you could afford SAT prep courses. I'm the woman who mortgaged her future so you could have one. And I'm grateful for that," she said. But the words sounded rehearsed, hollow. "But gratitude doesn't mean I have to live my entire life as a monument to struggle. I've moved beyond all that. I've created something better. You've created a lie. I've created a life," she shot back. And for the first time, I heard real emotion in her voice. "A life where I don't have to apologize for wanting beautiful things, where I don't have to feel guilty for succeeding, where I don't have to carry the weight of everyone else's sacrifices. Do you have any idea how exhausting it was growing up as your project, your great achievement, your vindication?" The words hit me like physical blows. Project, achievement. Vindication. Is that what you think you were to me? I asked. A project, weren't I? Her voice was quieter now, but no less devastating. Everything you did, every sacrifice you made, it wasn't really about me. It was about proving something to yourself, to the world, to my father who left us. I was just the vehicle for your ambitions. I opened my mouth to deny it, to defend the purity of my love for her, but the words wouldn't come, because buried in her accusation was a grain of truth that I'd never wanted to examine too closely. Had I loved her, or had I loved what she could become? Had I sacrificed for her happiness, or for my own validation? You're wrong, I said finally, but even I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. Am I? When I got into Harvard, you were more excited than I was. When I got the job at Goldman Sachs, you called everyone you knew to tell them about your daughter, the investment banker. When I started making real money, you'd bring up my salary in conversations with neighbors like it was your own accomplishment. I wasn't your daughter, I was your trophy. The words hung in the air between us, toxic and true, in ways I didn't want to acknowledge. I thought about all those times I'd bragged about Sarah's achievements, how I'd introduced her as my daughter, the Harvard graduate, or my daughter who works on Wall Street. I'd told myself it was pride, but maybe Sarah was right. Maybe it had been something else entirely. So you decided to erase me, I said. To pretend I never existed rather than deal with the complicated reality of our relationship. I decided to create space for myself to become who I wanted to be, without carrying the burden of who I used to be. Do you know what it's like to go to networking events and have people look at you with pity when you mention growing up poor? Do you know how many opportunities I lost because people saw me as charity case rather than an equal? So you became an orphan instead. I became someone whose success couldn't be diminished by sympathy or explained away by other people's sacrifices. I became someone who earned everything she has. But you didn't earn it alone, I said, my voice breaking. Every tuition payment, every rent check, every sacrifice that made your education possible, that was real. Sarah, you can rewrite history in your biography, but you can't change the fact that someone loved you enough to give up everything for your future. And look how that turned out, she said bitterly. You gave up everything, and now you have nothing. You're 60 years old, living in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens, working multiple jobs just to survive. Your retirement fund is gone. Your health insurance barely covers basic care. You sacrificed your entire life for my success, and where did it leave you? Alone, poor, and dependent on the daughter you created. Her words were like acid, burning away every justification I'd ever made for the choices I'd made. Because she was right. I had given up everything: my education, my career prospects, my financial security, my future, all for her. And now, at 60, I had nothing to show for those sacrifices, except a daughter who was ashamed of where she came from. I'm not dependent on you, I said weakly. Aren't you? You're living in my apartment right now. You flew here on a ticket I paid for. The dress you're wearing probably came from money I sent you for your birthday. Face it, Mom, you created me to be your salvation. And now you're angry that I refused to play that role. The conversation was spiraling into territory I wasn't prepared for, truths I'd never wanted to face. But before I could respond, I heard voices in the background of her call. Laughter, the clink of glasses, music playing softly. I have to go, Sarah said abruptly. I'm at a business dinner. We'll discuss this more when I get back. When will that be? Tomorrow night, late. Make sure you're gone before I arrive. I'll have my assistant arrange your flight home. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me alone in her pristine apartment with the echo of her words and the devastating realization that everything I'd believed about our relationship had been an illusion. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by those floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights and trying to process what had happened. Sarah's accusations played on repeat in my mind: project, trophy, burden, vindication. Had I really loved her, or had I loved what she represented? Had I sacrificed for her happiness, or for my own sense of purpose? The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable truths began to surface. I remembered how I'd felt when she got into Harvard, not just proud, but vindicated. All those years of struggle had been worth something. I remembered how I'd reacted to her job offer, not just happy for her, but triumphant. My sacrifices had paid off. I remembered how I'd talked about her success to anyone who would listen, not just sharing good news, but claiming credit. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe I had turned her into my project, my great achievement, my proof that love and sacrifice could overcome any obstacle. Maybe her success had become so intertwined with my identity that I couldn't see where my dreams ended and hers began. But did that justify what she'd done? Did my complicated motivations excuse her complete erasure of me from her life? Even if I had been a flawed mother with mixed motivations, I had been her mother. I had loved her, supported her, believed in her when no one else would. Didn't that count for something? The answer came the next evening when Sarah finally returned home. I heard her key in the lock around 10 p.m., followed by the sound of expensive heels on marble flooring. When she entered the living room where I'd been waiting, she looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was accompanied by a man I didn't recognize, tall and distinguished with the kind of casual confidence that comes from generational wealth. "Oh," she said when she saw me, her voice carefully neutral. "I thought you'd already left." "My flight isn't until tomorrow morning," I replied, standing up from the couch. "I was hoping we could talk." She glanced at her companion, who was looking between us with poorly concealed confusion. I realized he had no idea who I was. Just some older woman sitting in Sarah's apartment, uninvited. "Richard," Sarah said smoothly, "this is Margaret. She's been house-sitting for me while I was away." "Margaret, this is Richard Blackstone, my business partner." Business partner, not boyfriend, not friend. Business partner. And I wasn't her mother. I was Margaret, the house-sitter. Richard extended his hand with polite courtesy. "Nice to meet you, Margaret." Sarah mentioned she had someone reliable watching the place. I hope everything went smoothly. I stared at his outstretched hand, then at Sarah's carefully blank expression, and finally understood the full extent of her deception. She hadn't just erased me from her professional biography. She was erasing me from her personal life in real time. "Yes," I said slowly, shaking Richard's hand. "Everything went very smoothly. Your business partner has a beautiful home." Sarah's eyes flashed with warning, but her smile never wavered. "Well, I'm sure you're tired and ready to get back to your own life. Richard and I have some work to discuss." Work at 10 p.m. on a Friday night, wearing cocktail attire and smelling like expensive wine. "Actually," I said, my voice gaining strength, "I was hoping to clarify something about my payment. There seems to be some confusion about the terms of our arrangement." Sarah's composure cracked slightly. "I told you my assistant would handle that." "Yes, but I wanted to make sure you understood the full scope of services provided. You see, Richard, I didn't just watch Sarah's apartment. I've been providing support services for her for quite some time, nearly 30 years, actually." Richard looked confused but politely interested. Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear. 30 years, Richard asked. "That's quite a long-term arrangement. You must have known Sarah since she was very young." "Oh yes," I said, warming to the topic. "I've been there for every major milestone. Her first steps, her first day of school, her high school graduation. I even helped fund her education at Harvard. Quite an investment, really." The color was draining from Sarah's face. Richard was beginning to look less confused and more intrigued. "Fund her education?" he asked. "I thought Sarah was a scholarship student. She's always talked about overcoming poverty through academic achievement." "Well," I said, glancing at Sarah's increasingly panicked expression, "there were some scholarships, certainly, but the majority of her expenses were covered through private funding. Sacrificial funding, you might say. The kind that comes from someone who loves you unconditionally and believes in your potential even when you don't believe in yourself." Richard was staring at Sarah now, pieces clicking into place. "Sarah, who is this woman?" The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Sarah's perfect composure had completely crumbled, leaving behind something raw and desperate. "She single quotes us ... double quotes," Sarah began, then stopped. Her mouth opened and closed like she was drowning in air. "I'm her mother," I said simply. The words hung in the air like an explosion. Richard's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, realization, shock, and finally, something that looked like disgust. "Your mother," he repeated. "But you told me your parents died in a car accident when you were 12. Sarah's face had gone completely white. "Richard, I can explain, can you?" His voice was cold now, the polite veneer completely gone. Because I'm trying to understand how your dead mother is standing in your living room talking about funding your Harvard education. It's complicated, Sarah stammered. My childhood was difficult. Sometimes it's easier to simplify the story rather than get into all the painful details. Simplify. Richard's voice was rising now. You told me you were an orphan. You've built your entire persona around being a self-made woman who overcame tragic circumstances through sheer determination. I've introduced you to investors, clients, board members as this inspiring story of triumph over adversity. And now I find out your mother is alive and apparently funded your entire education. The adversity was real, Sarah said desperately. We were poor. She worked multiple jobs. It was a struggle that someone else paid for. Richard cut her off. A struggle that ended with you getting a Harvard education, which is more than most people dream of. He turned to me. Ma'am, I apologize for this situation. I had no idea. Please don't apologize, I said quietly. You couldn't have known. Apparently, I died in a car accident years ago. Richard looked back at Sarah with something approaching revulsion. Do you have any idea what this makes me look like? I've been telling everyone about your inspiring backstory. I've used your story to leverage sympathy investments, to open doors that might have stayed closed. If people find out that it was all fabricated, It wasn't fabricated, Sarah protested. It was, edited, streamlined. The core truth is still there. The core truth. Richard's laugh was harsh. The core truth is that you're a liar. And if you'll lie about something this fundamental, what else have you lied about? He was already moving toward the door, straightening his tie and checking his watch like he was late for an important appointment anywhere but here. Richard, please, Sarah followed him. Let me explain. This doesn't change anything between us. This doesn't change who I am or what I've accomplished, doesn't it? He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. I thought I knew who you were, Sarah. I thought you were someone special. Someone who'd earned everything she had through merit and determination. Now I find out you're just another rich kid who got ahead with family money and then lied about it to make herself more interesting. I'm not a rich kid, Sarah said, her voice breaking. We were poor. She's still poor. Look at her. Does she look like old money to you? Richard glanced at me, taking in my discount store clothes and my worn shoes, and for a moment I saw something like pity in his eyes. But when he looked back at Sarah, the disgust returned. No, she doesn't look like old money. She looks like a working-class woman who probably sacrificed everything for her daughter, which makes what you've done even worse. He opened the door. Don't call me, don't contact me. And if anyone asks, we never had this conversation. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid falling shut. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, staring at the closed door, before slowly turning to face me. The sophisticated, confident woman from the airport was gone. In her place stood someone who looked lost, young, and absolutely furious. Are you happy now? She asked, her voice shaking with rage. Do you feel vindicated? You've just destroyed the most important relationship in my life. I destroyed it, I asked. Sarah, I didn't make you lie to him. I didn't create the false biographies or hire the private investigator. I didn't erase myself from your life story. You did all of that. Because I had to. She screamed. And suddenly she was the teenager I remembered. All pretense stripped away. Do you have any idea what it's like to be constantly pitied? To have people look at you like you're some kind of charity case, to know that every opportunity comes with a footnote about your inspiring background and your triumph over adversity. So you decided to become an orphan instead. I decided to become someone whose success couldn't be diminished by other people's sympathy. Richard didn't fall in love with my tragic backstory. He fell in love with my strength, my intelligence, my ability to stand on my own. Now that's ruined because you couldn't just let me have this one thing. This one thing. Sarah, you erased me from your entire life. You turned me into a house sitter in my own daughter's home. You had me meet you at the airport like hired help while you talked about vacation plans that cost more than I make in a year. Because seeing you reminds me of everything I used to be. The words exploded out of her like a dam bursting. Every time I look at you, I see that cramped apartment in Queens. Those second-hand clothes, those nights when we couldn't afford dinner. I see poverty and struggle and limitation, and I can't go back to that. I won't go back to that. No one asked you to go back to anything. I just wanted to be part of your new life. You can't be part of this life, she said, gesturing around the expensive apartment. You don't fit here. You don't belong in this world. And every time someone meets you, they're going to see where I came from, and they're going to treat me differently. The honesty was brutal but clarifying. This wasn't about shame or embarrassment or the natural evolution of our relationship. This was about Sarah's fundamental belief that I was incompatible with the life she'd built, that my very existence was a threat to her carefully constructed identity. So what now? I asked. You've lost Richard. Your professional reputation is probably damaged. Your perfect life has some cracks in it. What's your plan? She sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know how to fix this. Despite everything, the lies, the betrayal, the erasure of 28 years of love and sacrifice, my heart broke for her. Because underneath all the sophisticated clothes and professional success, she was still my daughter. Still the child I'd raised, even if she'd grown into someone I barely recognized. I sat down beside her on the couch, not touching but close enough to offer comfort if she wanted it. You could start by telling the truth, I said gently. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. The truth is that I'm terrified. Terrified that if people know where I really came from, they'll never see me as their equal. Terrified that all my success will be attributed to sympathy rather than merit. Terrified that I'll always be the poor girl who got lucky rather than the woman who earned her place. And you think lying is better? I think controlling the narrative is better. I think being in charge of my own story is better than letting other people write it for me. But it's not your story anymore, is it? It's fiction. And tonight proved that fiction can't survive contact with reality. We sat in silence for several minutes, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows like distant stars. When Sarah finally spoke again, her voice was small and uncertain. I don't know how to be your daughter and also be successful, she said. I don't know how to honor where I came from without being trapped by it. You start by acknowledging that where you came from isn't something to be ashamed of. Poverty isn't a moral failing. Sarah, working multiple jobs isn't embarrassing. Sacrifice isn't weakness. Easy for you to say. You've never had to sit in boardrooms where everyone else went to prep school and spent summers in Europe. You've never had to smile and nod while people talk about their trust funds and family connections. You've never been the only person in the room who knows what it's like to wonder if you'll make rent. You're right, I said. I haven't, but I've also never had to lie about loving someone so much that I gave up everything for their future. She looked at me then, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years. Do you regret it? She asked. All the sacrifices, knowing how this turned out. It was the question I'd been avoiding, even in my own mind. Did I regret working 3 jobs? Did I regret selling family heirlooms? Did I regret mortgaging my future for her education? Did I regret loving her so completely that I lost myself? In the process, I regret that my love became a burden to you, I said finally. I regret that my sacrifices made you feel obligated rather than supported. I regret that I couldn't figure out how to help you succeed without making you feel like you owed me your life. But do you regret the choices themselves? I thought about the years of struggle, the nights of exhaustion, the gradual erosion of my own dreams in service of hers. I thought about the woman I might have been if I'd chosen differently, if I'd invested in my own education and career instead of hers. No, I said, and realized I meant it. I don't regret choosing you. I regret that you felt like you had to choose between me and the life you wanted. Sarah started crying then, not the angry tears of our confrontation, but something deeper and more genuine. For the first time in years, she looked like my daughter rather than a stranger wearing her face. I missed you, she whispered. Every day, I missed you. But I didn't know how to miss you and also move forward. I didn't know how to love you and also love myself. I reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. Love isn't a zero-sum game, I said. You don't have to choose between honoring your past and building your future. You don't have to erase me to become who you want to be. But what if people treat me differently when they know the truth? Then they're not people worth knowing. And if they treat you differently because your mother loved you enough to sacrifice for your education, then they're telling you more about themselves than they are about you. We talked until dawn, really talked, in a way we hadn't in years. Sarah told me about the pressure she felt in her professional world, the constant imposter syndrome, the fear that she'd be exposed as someone who didn't belong. I told her about the loneliness of the past 3 years. The confusion and hurt of watching her drift away. The devastating discovery of her fictional biography. Neither of us apologized completely. The wounds were too deep and complex for simple apologies, but we began the slow process of understanding each other, of figuring out how to rebuild the relationship that had been damaged by love and ambition, and the collision between dreams and reality. As the sun rose over Central Park, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. "I'm going to call Richard," she said. "I'm going to tell him the whole truth. About you, about our history, about why I lied. And if he can't accept it, then he wasn't the right person for me anyway. And if your professional reputation suffers, then I'll deal with it. I'm good at what I do, Mom. My skills are real, even if my backstory was fabricated. Maybe it's time to find out if I can succeed on merit alone, without the sympathy vote or the inspiring orphan narrative." "And us?" I asked. "What happens with us?" She squeezed my hand. "I want to try again. I want to figure out how to be your daughter and also be myself. I want to stop being ashamed of where I came from and start being proud of where I'm going." It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was no magical reconciliation that erased years of pain and distance, but it was a beginning, tentative, fragile, but real. The phone call to Richard didn't go well. He listened to Sarah's complete confession with cold silence and then informed her that their business partnership was over and that he'd be taking his clients elsewhere. Several professional relationships were damaged when the truth about Sarah's background came out, though others proved more understanding than she'd expected. Sarah had to rebuild aspects of her career, but she discovered that her skills and intelligence were more valuable than her tragic backstory had ever been. She found new clients who respected her work rather than her supposed triumph over adversity. She learned to network based on competence rather than sympathy. More importantly, she began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship. It started with weekly phone calls that gradually became more frequent and more genuine. She visited me in Queens, seeing my small apartment through adult eyes and understanding for the first time the reality of the sacrifices I'd made. She helped me with some financial difficulties without making me feel like charity. I supported her through the professional challenges that came with rebuilding her reputation based on truth rather than fiction. We learned to love each other as adults rather than as the idealized versions we'd created in our minds. The process wasn't smooth. There were setbacks, arguments, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves. Sarah still struggled with shame about our humble beginnings. I still struggled with the urge to live vicariously through her achievements, but we kept working at it, kept choosing each other despite the complications. 3 years later, Sarah met someone new, a man who knew her complete story from the beginning and loved her not despite her background but because of the strength it had required to overcome it. When she brought him home to meet me, she introduced me as her mother with pride rather than shame. "This is the woman who made everything possible," she told him. "She worked 3 jobs to put me through college, sold family heirlooms to pay for my SAT prep, and never asked for anything in return except that I be happy." Standing in my small apartment, watching my daughter speak about our history with honesty and love, I finally understood that all the sacrifices had been worth it, not because they'd created the successful woman she'd become, but because they'd created the foundation for the relationship we were building now. As I finished telling you this story, Sarah is planning her wedding, and I'm helping her choose flowers, not because she needs my help. She could afford the most expensive wedding planner in the city, but because she wants me to be part of this chapter of her life. She wants my opinion, my presence, my love. The wedding dress she's chosen costs more than I made in my first year of working, but when she tried it on for me, she looked like the little girl who used to play dress up in my closet. Beautiful, radiant, and finally, at peace with who she is and where she came from. I've learned that love isn't about sacrifice, it's about choice. Every day, we choose whether to love each other despite our flaws, our mistakes, our complicated histories. Sarah chose to love me despite the burden my sacrifices had placed on her. I chose to love her despite the pain her rejection had caused me. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who hurt us deepest, but sometimes, if we're brave enough to keep choosing love, they're also the ones who teach us the most about forgiveness, growth, and the possibility of redemption. Family isn't just about blood or shared history. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. It's about telling the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. It's about choosing each other, again and again. despite all the reasons we could walk away. And sometimes, when we're very lucky, it's about discovering that the love we thought we'd lost was actually just waiting for us to find our way back to each other. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family, forgiveness, and second chances. Have you ever felt like your love was unappreciated? Have you ever had to rebuild a relationship that seemed beyond repair? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories about the complicated, beautiful, heartbreaking, and ultimately hopeful reality of family relationships. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that remind us we're not alone in our struggles, and that even the deepest wounds can heal when we choose love over pride. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember that it's never too late to choose love, to tell the truth, and to fight for the relationships that matter most. Until next time, keep believing in the power of forgiveness and the possibility of new beginnings.